Hi, welcome to our webinar on the post-pandemic leadership conundrum. I'm really excited today to introduce you to Kevin Roberts, the CFO of Geisinger. And my name is Ed Marks. I serve as the Chief Digital Officer for Tech Mahindra Health and Life Sciences. So I will do a quick introduction. We have so many questions already, which reminds me, this is live. And the reason we do it live is for two reasons. The first is for your experience. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. So you know how this works. You can ask questions. Many of you did already. We've incorporated into what we're planning to talk about. But if you have other questions, please, in real time, enter them. I can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we will really try. The second reason we do it, frankly, is for our own experience. It's a lot more fun doing it live. So because of time constraints, I'll do a quick intro for Kevin. You'll see an intro slide here so you can read all about his impressive background. But Kevin's also a very dear personal friend. He's the person responsible for my CIO career. So I'm always grateful for the opportunity that Kevin enabled for me back in the early 2000s. And we've done a lot of things together, both work-wise, transforming organizations, but also on a personal level, even visiting our troops in Kosovo. We were just talking about that memory, how we were able to do that together. So a wonderful person. And I can also tell you from my experience working with many CFOs, the most progressive CFO that I know of in healthcare today. And so, Kevin, welcome. Why don't you take just a couple of minutes maybe to tell us about your journey, Kevin, as how you became a CFO, because that's always interesting and that obviously informs your perspectives. Then we're going to jump right into all these questions on digital transformation and the CFO role.
Certainly. Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Ed, for those very, very kind words. I was actually even in Ed's wedding, if you can believe that. But welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And my journey, I won't go back terribly long, but really coming up through the kind of finance and accounting piece of it, and eventually went to work for a community hospital, private practice-based hospital in Peoria, Illinois, and I was the controller and eventually became CFO, and was CFO there for about 8 years, left and went to the Cleveland Clinic as the treasurer. And so stepped back from that CFO role, and after about 9 years there and tremendous experience, became a CFO again in roughly 2001. Ed and I met at about the same time. That was at University Hospitals in Cleveland, and I've been a CFO since. And you can see from the bio where I've been. It was never intentional. It was opportunistic, and so. I think the other thing that I would say is, I've been a CFO or in these roles for a long time, and the change is dramatic, as I'm sure it is in your roles. It was very at a micro level, 30 years ago or more, and today it's a macro sort of thing. Not that we don't have all of the micro issues to deal with every day as we do, but my day-to-day routine is much more macro than it is micro, and that's a good fortune that I have in that regard.
Yeah, that's excellent, Kevin. And along those same lines, so this first couple minutes, we're sort of doing introduction, get to know Kevin, and then we're a little bit about the CFO role in digital transformation. Then we're going to head into the main part of this, which is all about the pandemic and the whole balance that we talked about with navigating the financials and where do we place our bets. So how has, Kevin, the digital transformation role changed the CFO role? So for, like, if I can just make a very quick comparison, like with the CIO, used to be very operational and very heads down infrastructure type thing, and it has really morphed even before the pandemic, but I think more people caught it now and has forced others to make that change into being more, digitally enabling the enterprise, thinking more strategic. So how has, just help our audience who is a lot of finance, but a lot of IT as well, how has the role for the CFO changed? And you've alluded to it, but from a digital perspective, and then wrapped into that, because this was one of the questions that came in, how has digital therefore also impacted RCM, revenue cycle and patient access?
Sure. Well, that's a lengthy answer, but if just to give a little perspective, I came out of undergrad and I went to work for what's now KPMG, and at point in my career, I was trained as a computer audit specialist. So I really had very little back then. Data processing was what it was called, but IT experience. But that gave me a clear insight into the power of IT, and it's obviously evolved over a significant period of time. It was an area of strong interest on my part. I saw all the things that we did manually years and years ago, and all the things that we did from an automated way, but not terribly efficient and not always very effective. And so we fast forward to today, and I think of digital not so much in the context of the big application or technology platforms we have, but how we then really exploit those. And for us at Geisinger, for example, a year ago, we presented to our board a digital strategy. And I think in some respects, I mean, we had all of the transactional tools in place, but our customer facing, the way we faced with our employees, the way we thought about it, really just changed as a result of the work that we did around digital strategy, especially our ability to transform our experience with, in our case, both patients and members, because we have a large health plan. Let me just kind of move into the pandemic. For us, we estimate through the end of this year, it's going to be about $500 million gross before any federal aid of impact. Now, we have the good fortune of having a health plan. And so with lower healthcare utilization, we obviously had lower claims expense. So that offsets some. So if we look at our clinical enterprise, that number was probably more like $650 or $700 million. Big impact. After federal aid, we estimate it's still going to be in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 million that it's going to cost Geisinger. So how do you make these investments? And I would submit, how do you not make them? Because this is the promise at this time to make our work much more efficient and much more effective. Ed, I think part of your question was around patient access and then also around revenue management. So patient access, while many have probably had contactless check-in and check-out, that's something that we had put kind of, on a side burner, if you will, for implementation in the future. We're doing that right now, and that's around safety, but also it's about the ability to leverage the technology to reduce the number of patient access reps that we have. So the efficiency as well as the effectiveness. So that's one. The second is with respect to revenue management, the way in which we engage with our patients. I mean, I'm sure a number of you have the technologies by kind of the big four, VisitPay, Simply, PatientCo, Cedar, and some of those. And we're implementing that now because we really need to get out in front of this continuing increase in patient responsibility and our ability to engage the patient in that financial experience in a very, very positive way, but a dramatically different way than we have in the past. And that is enabled by technology and dramatically different sort of approach to technology than historically the way we've handled a lot of things in rev cycle. And then the last I would say is we are actually, we were one of the very first to implement Epic Clinicals in the middle 90s. We're now implementing Epic Resolute for rev cycle early next year. And our ability to really transform our revenue cycle, make it much, much more efficient and much more effective that is key to this overall strategy.
That's great insights. And yeah, I need to make a shout out really quick to John Kravitz. And you're very fortunate to have an excellent CIO in your midst to work with. And John's done a great job up at Geisinger. So that leads, yeah. So now we're heading into the pandemic sort of questions. So the heart of our time together. And again, I just want to encourage any of you who have questions to please go ahead and enter those, and we'll try to get to those in real time. We've already knocked out a couple of them that were submitted ahead of time. So I'm really happy about that because we're doing this for our community, not for ourselves. So Kevin, how do you balance, and you sort of are heading there, how do you balance short-term needs and long-term transformation? That's the million-dollar question. Like, how do you make that happen? It sounds good in theory, but how do you make it happen in practical terms?
Well, if it were only $1 million question, it'd be really easy to answer, but it's hundreds of millions and sometimes a billion, pardon me. And I think that's what makes it much more challenging. But I think the answer lies within the question, and it is about balance. And it's something that I talk about in almost everything that I, discuss in a more kind of strategic and serious way, and that is balance. And if we've got a continuum, that doesn't mean you're at one end or the other, but someplace in between. And that's the difficult piece. But I think, if we, and there's lots of writings on being so short-term focused, whether it's a public company being quarterly earnings focused without regard to the long term, and then you sacrifice the long term, and these investments that pay off in the long term take so long sometimes to make and complete. It's a little bit like the implementation of some of our big transactional systems. They take several years before you can implement them. And so you have to always be looking at the long term. At the same time, we just got downgraded by S&P in May and Moody's in early June. And that's a recognition that our financial performance is not where it needs to be. And so we've got to be responsive to that. And that has short-term, but also long-term implications. So again, I think it is about balance. But the other thing, though, that I would add to that is, and the pandemic is a perfect example, today is the opportunity, and I use the term, the promise, to really get the efficiency and the effectiveness. I feel, having worked in healthcare so long, that our technology has been kind of at best a B+. And the integration has not always been exceptional. And we need to look to other industries where they're setting examples of highly efficient processes and incredibly effective, more reliable, more consistent, repeatable, et cetera. And that's what we need to be able to do to basically try to turn that cost that we've incurred, that several $100 million that I referenced earlier around the pandemic. And that, again, is only through the end of this year, and try to turn that the other way with this efficiency and effectiveness and the promise of technology in that regard.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make, and something that I've been stressing a lot actually over the last couple of years is that, and I talk about it from a CIO perspective, but I'm going to turn it on to CFO perspective here in a second. So basically, we have to learn from other industries. And because we haven't maybe as much as we should have, there is a trend right now that CIOs and chief digital officers are being hired from retail, from outside of healthcare provider space into the healthcare provider space. And I think one of the reasons, and I'm not opposed to it at all, I think it makes us, I'm a proponent actually. But I don't think it has to be that way. I think it's incumbent upon CIOs to go and learn from other industries, bring back those best practices. What about CFOs? Are we seeing something similar from a finance point of view, where maybe some CFOs aren't making that same turn, learning from other industries, and that there's hiring of CFOs from outside of healthcare? I'm just curious, if there's a trend like that on the finance side.
Yeah, so when I left Cleveland and went to BJC, I followed a CFO from inside of healthcare, but outside of not-for-profit healthcare. I've been on the commercial side. And, I think the challenge there is the learning curve is really steep. And this was in an academic environment, kind of a pure academic. And I think the other part about it is, quite honestly, is decision making, and our rate of change inside of the provider industry is much slower than what many folks are accustomed to outside of the provider healthcare space. And sometimes that can be frustrating. So yes, we've seen it. I think we've seen some that have been incredibly successful and some maybe not quite so successful. But I think, one of the challenges that I believe we have as an industry is we believe we are unique. And yes, we are. We're all unique, but not in such ways that we can ignore the business implications. I talk about 5 things that are important in healthcare: quality, safety, unmatched customer experience, highly engaged, high-performing workforce, and last, sustainable business model. We have to perform well on all of those. It used to be that if you perform well on the first four, the financials took care of themselves. That's a naive view. It does not happen. It's not easy anymore. So we've got to be focused on the business side as maybe challenging as that says, or as that seems, we really have to focus on that. And taking a view that is different than the way we always have is the way we kind of get a different result. So I think it's incredibly important for us to look outside the industry in which we find ourselves. Maybe in my case, the industry that I've worked in for 40 years almost, and learn from that.
Yeah, that's a good practical thing to do. So Kevin, a twist on an earlier question, because again, I think this is the heart of this entire conversation, and especially brought about, again, highlighted by the challenge of the pandemic, is how do you balance the need for significant expense reduction? And I don't want to name the organizations, but you can read about them in the headlines. I mean, everyone's dealing with it. Where, like, we had a call earlier today, I was on a call with a good friend, CIO, big health system, and he was like, Ed, we need help. We have to reduce massive expenses. They have massive layoffs. And at the same time, there's the mandate for digital transformation. So we touched on it a little bit earlier, but sort of a little bit of a different twist. And just any sort of like practical things that you might be doing at Geisinger or that you think about that can help you do both. So it's not an either or, it's an and, I guess, is really the solution.
Well, first, I would agree. It is an and. I mean, the complexity lies in how big the part before the end and how big the part after the end are. But in our situation, I mean, we have a big performance improvement initiative that we were planning to start in March or early April. That got put on hold for a couple of months. We kicked it off basically right after Memorial Day, but it's a 4-year journey, and this is the 4th one that I've done in 4 organizations. And so, it is 4 years. So not everything has to happen today or tomorrow or next week or next month, but it also can't all happen in the 4th year because based on experience, it just doesn't. So there are a number of areas, though, that we're investing in, and I reference digital transformation. And again, I'm not talking about big transactional systems or anything of that nature. Really, I'm talking about all of the tools that help us with consumer facing, whether it's patient or member or potential patient or potential member, and all the backstage stuff that happens to facilitate that. And that's a several $100 million investment that we're going to make. And there are no guarantees, but we do understand that the way in which we engage with our consumers, patients, and members has to be more efficient. We have a virtual triage that we're implementing now that will reduce calls into our nurse helpline. We have a number of things taking place in the patient access and the scheduling and the call center area that reduce all the chat bots that will reduce the calls coming in. That means we need fewer people. Digital options, on your phone or PDA or desktop, again, to reduce these. So that's one example. The second is, if we think about revenue cycle, I mean, the numbers of calls we get about bills and amounts due, and the frictional costs with all of that, the resources we spend around denials. I look for the day when a new denial posts that a big red siren goes off. Now, the fact of the matter is, because everybody will be working from home, nobody will see the kind of the light go off, but it says there's something new that has happened. That's not a person sitting there, because if it's a person sitting there, it'll be 12 months from now. But it's the ability to use technology and really use it in a way that maximizes the opportunity to know currently what is taking place so we can actually address it, whether it's documentation or process or whatever. So those are a few that I think are really important about becoming more efficient and more effective.
Yeah, those are really practical. We have 10 minutes left. So again, last reminder to ask questions. I see a couple on there that we will be trying to get to, but if you have a question, this is a great opportunity to interact with the best CFO that I know in the country and healthcare. So please, we welcome your engagement. I have
Can
one
I ask,
last,
may I ask a question, Ed?
yeah, of course.
So, and it's a topic that I want to kind of touch on, and I think it might have been asked, and it's a relationship, CIO, CFO, or for that matter, any, but let's talk about CIO and CFO. And, I've had a couple of occasions in my career where I've had the opportunity to work with people such as Ed and others. John Kravitz is another one. And in Ed's situation or ours, he reported to me. But so that relationship, we tend to look at things maybe a little different. Our experiences have maybe been different. And so, but how do you look at that relationship and how do I? So one, you have to view the CIO as a partner. I think that's incredibly important. You have to develop a level of trust and transparency. I think the CIO has to recognize that the CFO is frequently all about the money, although I did list the money 5 out of 5 items, very last. So I point that out, but it is about return on investment. The NSO, the next shiny object or the new shiny object. Yeah, you can do those here and there in modest ways, but that's not going, if that's what you want to do, that's going to be really hard. But then let's talk about, whether it's bleeding edge, bleeding edge, leading edge, or cutting edge. You've got to be able to show in real clear ways what you're seeking to achieve and how you're going to do that and how this technology enables that, and then what's the return. But the other 3 points that I would make, other 2 really, is organizational strategic plan. It tells us, it is our map for where we're going as an organization. Secondly, IT strategic plan. Ed and I know all about what we put together and what that meant. And then the third for us, digital strategy. That was what we took to our board last year. They approved it. Those really map out what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. And if an initiative doesn't align with that, then you're not going to do it. And so, from a relationship standpoint, I just think that's really important. Some of those things that I just referenced, and that's important in getting that balance on that continuum.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does come down to developing that trusted relationship and proving yourself. I often find that CFOs are very black and white, right? Typically dealing with numbers. And so you've got to demonstrate, good financial stewardship. And I think that always helps build that trust. And then not being sneaky. I think a lot of that's the way people were forced to, I guess, in the past. I can't make excuses for them, but they would sort of hide things. And I found that the best thing is just to be very open and transparent. And especially when there's mistakes, something happened, didn't go right, didn't meet numbers or whatever, just be honest about it, transparent, and that helps build that trust, builds that relationship. Kevin, what about the approach of saying, hey, I have a plan here. I've developed a plan. I worked with, some good people, and we can take out 30%. So I come to you as a CFO and I say, look, Kevin, I by moving to the cloud or whatever, I can take out 30%. Can we figure out a way that we can take 10% of, say, we give back 20% or 50% of that 30% savings, we give that back to the organization because we're part of the organization, we've got to do our part. But can we carve out some of those dollars then to invest, as long as it aligns with strategy, as we discussed, to invest in fast forwarding some of these strategies that we've been talking about that are on the plan? How do you react? Is that a favorable thing? Is it a creative thing that that CFOs are open to?
Well, I think it's all in how you present it. If you come to me and you say, I'm going to save a lot of money by spending twice as much, that probably doesn't kind of work. And I'm embellishing that just to illustrate the point. But, the way in which I would answer that is, over my career, large or, appropriately sized capital investments should always have a look back. And in my career, we've always done that. The people that I feel the strongest about approving capital investment are those who deliver on what they said they were going to deliver. And you kind of reference CFOs frequently, very black and white, but I think one of the things we're very much about is accountability. If you come to me for $50 million and 2 years later, I look back and it's like, wow, not only did he deliver what he said he was going to do and the return, he actually improved that. The next time you come, I'm going to think about it differently than if you didn't deliver on that. So again, I think this is part of that relationship and the accountability. My question to you of the 30% versus half of it is, so what are you going to do with it? I'm fine saying, let's take 15 and set it aside, but what's your plan? How does it tie back to, our organizational strategy, IT strategy, digital strategy in our case? How does it tie back? And how is it going to favorably impact that? And then what's it going to do to OPEX or operating expense? Because, you make $100 million investment, that's one time. But if it costs you $50 million every year, that's every year. So I think you just need to make sure that we're thinking about those as well.
Yeah, we're down to 3 minutes. We'll have to do rapid fire. I'll just say one thing though, that is one thing I really learned from you and our experience at UH that I took further on. And I kept, even if no one was asking for it, we did what's called value realization, whatever term you want. But I had a dedicated FTE. That's all we did on every investment. And whether there was ROI for IT or better, ROI for some other component of the health system that we were enabling, we kept track of all of it so that we could just show, hey, we've been good stewards, or hey, we made a mistake here, what can we learn from it? And again, in full transparency, and it just built a lot of trust for us, and we ended up getting more investment in the future. So that's a really good thing that you're talking about, is the value realization, being above board, and again, goes back and feeds that relationship. Okay, so rapid fire. So these have to be like 30 seconds, Kevin. There was how has elective procedures, this is specific to Geisinger, how has elective procedures, the decline, hurt or helped Geisinger? Because you are both a payer, and you alluded to in the beginning with some of the gross margin numbers.
Yeah, so net impact was very unfavorable, about $140 million a month in April, and that was really our only full month, and that was 185 on the clinical enterprise and about 50 or so. The health plan was about 25% offset, maybe 25 to 30, depending upon the month. And so clearly the health plan was favorable, but again, only about 25% of the unfavorable variance on the clinical enterprise.
And then how has the pandemic impacted the use of analytics and population health? Again, it's going to be a little different for you all because you're both payer and provider, but were you more reliant on analytics than ever, or was it the same in population health?
Yeah, so we have a large data analytics group headed up by David Vaudry, came out of New York about 18 months ago, has done incredible work. And I started seeing all of this reporting that was getting populated, and it was around all sorts of things around, we did all of our most of our testing internal in our labs based in Danville, Pennsylvania, if you can believe that. And so a lot of the testing data that I saw, and then all of the analytics about the patients present within our facilities who were positive, and those in ICUs and those on vents, and what our capacity was, et cetera. So we made tremendous use of analytics during this entire period. If you wanted something that wasn't COVID-related reporting, it was a little harder to get during that time period because we had significant resources devoted to that.
Well, this has been awesome, and I think very enlightening. It was for me, and I'm hoping the same for our audience. I'm sure it was. It's great to hear the CFO perspective. Oftentimes, we silo ourselves, not only just healthcare, but just CIOs in general. And it's always good to hear other people's perspectives, especially a highly accomplished CFO such as yourself. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. And thank you to the audience.
And so we have some upcoming webinars. We are doing a series. It's turning out to be a long-term series on race relations and healthcare technology specifically. And this month we have Myra Davis. She's an awesome CIO out of Houston Children's Hospital there. And then we have more on sort of the post-pandemic age coming up. We've got a little bit of leadership and the psychology of leadership. And then race relations again in August with a CMIO that you'll really enjoy hearing from. So really a lot of things happening to add value. If you have any other ideas or anyone else you'd like to see, we're happy to include that. So thank you so much again to the audience and to Kevin, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.